subject of the rest of my teaching, is how to master desire. But suffice it to say that unless desire is mastered, death is inevitable and rebirth is inevitable. The final mastery of death can only occur if desire is mastered. I'm not going to do that in the last 10 minutes before you're going to die. So, if one is going to begin, one should begin early with such a task. The thing that makes death so difficult is one's attachment to life. Because people want to live, then death becomes awesome. If one does not resist death, death is easy. Now this isn't just words. Swami Yogananda, when he was around 60, was at a meeting. Dinner party, I believe. And he sat straight and said, I'm going to die. He got up, went into the next room, and died. Well, his destiny, his karma was pretty good. There's a general rule. And the rule is that the more independent one is of karma, the quicker and easier the death will be. Whether that karma is good or bad, by the way. If you had a lot of good karma, then you've got to live a long time to enjoy it, even if the body is run down. If you have a lot of bad karma, you have to live and suffer to pay that karmic debt from your guilty conscience. But if your karma is clean, you die quickly. Now in India, I think it was in the mid-40s sometime, very high saint, Ramana Maharshi, who was very pure in mind and thought, and realized who he was, and had the full separation of himself from his mind and from his body, contracted cancer. His body karma was not completely paid. And in spite of a very agonizing type of cancer, very painful, to the death he went gloriously and shining. This went on for months, this process with him, gradually dying of cancer, and people were watching to see whether he would break, whether he would suddenly say, all this business about me being who I really am is not true, and I'm just a miserable piece of meat dying of cancer. They were all waiting. In fact, the newsreel cameras were all around waiting to see what would happen. Unfortunately, they were around, because what did happen is right up to the moment of death, his eyes were opened and he was shining gloriously and just left. It was a living proof of his own inner experiences. Having prepared himself to a lifetime of realization, consciousness, growth, and non-attachment to the body, his death, in spite of being horrendously painful, was a glorious success in spite of that loss. Ramana Maharshi, Ramakrishna, died of cancer also, and succeeded fully in conquering the death process. No doubt there have been many other cases, but they all had this one thing in common, is that they knew who they were. They knew that they were a spiritual entity, or had absolute conviction or faith that they were that. Otherwise, they hang on, and hang on, and hang on. They go into a coma, and stay into a coma for a long, long time. Why do they stay in that coma for such a long time? They stay in the coma because they think they're the body, and they're still hanging on to it. Secondly, they don't know they're dead. If one were convinced that one was the body, how could one ever know that one were dead? This is a very big problem. In fact, it's one of the main problems of handling the death process, is knowing whether you're dead or not. Some of these grand old politicians hang on for weeks and weeks in a coma, while Franco was a Catholic and should have known better. He hung on to every cell of that body to the bitter end. This makes the whole death process difficult, arduous. And trying for the individual himself and for everyone around. Looked at from a yogic point of view, it's a bit disgusting. But it's understandable also that if a person thinks they are a body, therefore they're going to be attached to it, because the body has built into its brain a mechanism which says survive at all costs, live no matter what. This is the orientation of the body's brain structure. It's built into it from its evolutionary history. It is the instinct to survive. And if one is convinced that one is that, then one is going to have a hard time with that. So one should spend considerable effort on working on one understanding this point, that you're not a body, you're not a personality, you're not, in other words, Henry or Helen. You're not that which is associated with the name that you've been given and grown up with. But you are this continuous, immortal entity. The strong attachment for life makes you resist the process of death. It's interesting. It is impossible to die unless you're either crushed by an accident, and even then the same principle applies. It is impossible to die unless you go along with it. Yes, even though the body maybe was run over by a steamroller, and it's about a half an inch thick, you could still hold on to it. You could still hold on to it. This is me. Smashed as I am, this is me. And unless you accept the fact of death, you will not die. You can hold on just as long as you like. But finally it comes to the point, well, this thing is not of any use. It's in a coma. It's been in a coma now for 3 years. I may as well let it go. So when you let it go, then the body dies, or death occurs. There's a separation then between you and it. The etheric body does not leave the physical body until you have decided that death is preferable to continued life the way it is. Now, some people decide this when they're about 20 or 21. They decide that life isn't worth living. They often try suicide in their 20s, quite commonly. Usually they don't make it, but they pull out of the body. Not totally. And the body is just kind of half alive, and they're kind of half there. So their dying is happening, but not death. Death comes at the last moment when you finally decide that the body isn't worth keeping. Now, this is usually because it is either injured badly through accident, but more commonly, it's gradually gotten older and older and older and more useless, till finally one just decides that it isn't worth the bother. If one is well advanced, as I said earlier, karmically speaking, then upon that decision, the death process ensues quickly. If not, it'll still go slowly. And it's a grand old man of architecture, Frank Lloyd Wright. And I think it was 91. And he was still sitting up, going through architectural magazines and arguing about the idiots that were still building idiot buildings, full of life. And the body was pretty rickety at this time, but still going. And apparently he decided that that was enough. A day and a half later, he was dead. He got pneumonia, and was gone. When the power to resist death is abandoned, you take, in essence, the life force out of the body, then it succumbs quickly. It's interesting to note that the human body, for its size and its weight structure, lives almost twice as long as it should. Yes. The human body is a mammal. And they've charted out, according to the weight of mammals, their lifespan. The bigger they get, the longer they live. Elephants live a long time, and rabbits a short time, and so on, like that. With humans somewhere in between. And you get a nice smooth chart of increased lifespan as the weight or size of the body goes up. Except for the human, at his weight, it's twice as long. He's clear off the chart. Why is that? That is because the human body has an etheric body associated with it. That is the vital force from the etheric body formed. It's pervading this body. That is the spiritual force, if you prefer to call it. It's pervading the body and making it continue to live. And because we humans mostly are so attached to life, whereas an animal is not attached to life, he has no thought about it one way or another. The body gets old, it just quits. Not us. We hold on. We're going to live just as long as possible. Well, there's something to say for that. Because as long as you're alive, you have some opportunity to learn who you are, what you're doing here, what it's for. Not just for pleasure's sake. The purpose of life is not for pleasure. The purpose of life is to realize the truth. There's a lot of ways of putting that, but it amounts to the same thing. And the truth of you is that you are this spiritual entity. There's a lot of discussion that has gone on in the last few years, and I think very good, about what about doctors prolonging life? There's been a lot of ethical arguments, a lot of legal arguments about should they go on prolonging life as long as possible because that is their duty. Well, there's something to say for that approach. But when you start to fill the body with drugs, opiates, kill the pain, because the person is so out of it that they don't even know what's happening, how can this be any addition to dying consciously and dying purposefully? One loses one's power of choice under such drug conditions. I can't recommend it. some people have also suggested using other drugs, hallucinogens, like LSD, to aid the death process. I cannot recommend that either. Although it's done with the best of intentions, as the doctors give their opiates with the best of intentions. Both types of drugs force chemically a situation on the individual. And he's had enough of this force. In fact, that's why he's dying. It's too much from life. It's been beaten at him. And so drugs of either type I cannot recommend as a good way to approach the death experience. So therefore, what is best? If one is going to go into the death situation, and one we're going to set it up, how would it be? First of all, it would be in a friendly situation. When death becomes obvious and that medical procedures, etc., are obviously not going to succeed, let's take the person out of a hospital setting, number one. And number two, let's have him surrounded by friends. Now that doesn't necessarily mean family. It may mean family, it may not mean family. But it should be with friends. Now, some people have family as friends and some people don't. But if you're in an unfriendly atmosphere, trying to make your relatives happy with whom you've been fighting for the last 40 years, what is the point of that? You're certainly not going to straighten it out then. And all they're going to do is sit around and feel guilty for all the awful things they've done to you. And then suddenly start saying how wonderful person you are. So it should be a friendly, well-lit, clean, nice atmosphere. With no hurry-burry. Take it easy, all right. Nothing serious, nothing heavy. And I would suggest a orientation or an involvement in things spiritual. That is, things dealing with God, with truth, with religion, with the individual spiritual entity of who they really are, and that sort of thing. The person is beginning to drift out of the body in a rather serious way. So they will be interested in it. They may have postponed it before, but now they're going to be particularly interested. And if it's you, you'll be particularly interested in what's going to happen. And so, having that type of a light, clean, friendly atmosphere is very conducive to an unstressful and clear-minded situation. Now, I'm recommending the ideal. We seldom get that ideal. But unless somebody puts up something here to strive for, where you're going to go on with this idiocy of the hospital scene. Of course, sometimes it can't be avoided because they sometimes can't tell when they're going to die. But usually, if a doctor is honest, he can tell within at least a few hours. And this business about tubes and machines and all this business, only a society who was completely convinced that they were bodies would go on with that sort of thing. So I don't think we can try to argue the doctors out of the tube unless we approach it from a spiritual point of view. If that society as a whole would accept and understand that they are spiritual individuals, they no longer are going to try to maintain the body as long as possible. Now, of course, people have their own religious traditions. Whether they be Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, or whatever. Very often, there's the priest, or the rabbi, or the minister, or whatever. And he should play his part. And I think he should play his part in a very intense manner, and with the background of the material that we're covering today. Without that, it becomes almost a disgusting thing. Well, many people have been sincerely upset about this for the last 15, 20 years. How can we go on having death be such an undignified and disgusting routine? And everybody is moaning and bewailing the transition of an individual from one state to another, from being in a body to being out of a body. You do not cease to exist. The body ceases to function, yes, but you do not cease to exist. There is not even a break in consciousness. There's a break, but there's not a break in consciousness. In other words, you just go on being this conscious entity which you are. You don't turn into something else, but you don't suddenly become a part of God, or you don't suddenly turn into a different type of thing. It's just you going on. But in the same way as when you go to sleep before you start to dream, there is a break. There's also this in the death experience. This, in Tibetan, is called Bardo, which means gap. And they wrote a book about this, about what can be done at the point of death and what can be done to help the after-death experience. Dealing with this experience. In the West, we don't have this. The Catholics do have some things, but the Protestants are mostly concerned with the living and trying to make them feel good, which is fine. If the living people knew that when the person leaves the body, they're looking down on the scene, that's in that other drawing, from their etheric body, and wondering why the people are so upset, crying, and at least they're saying good things about him, which they never said. It really was a good sort. Now, they remember all the good things that you did. And then you're looking down and what are these people carrying on? If they knew that was what was happening, the survivors would not be upset. And I think this is the greatest favor we can do worrying about the survivors, is just let them know the truth of the situation. Yes, death is a failure. Yes, there is a separation. Yes, you're cut off from your friends and relatives and all that sort of thing. But you still are. The Christian thing, the common Christian view, is that the soul goes to heaven and they die. This is the crux in the Western situation. The soul's going to get all these good things, but they die. Well, I couldn't see this as a kid. The heck with the soul. Let it look out for itself. It's going to get to go to heaven and have all those good things in heaven. And I'm going to have to go to the grave. Forget it. But this is not the truth. You are that soul, and the soul is you. And you are the one who goes to heaven. Unfortunately. Not to go to heaven. Because heaven is also a trap as well as hell. But we'll deal with that later on. Well, I've talked on here for the better part of an hour. If you have questions, you should write them down, save them until the last period, because most of them will be answered during the earlier talk. And then we can deal with them all at one time, in an intense fashion. I'm going to take a 15-minute break now, give you a chance to stretch your legs, etc. Then we'll come back and we'll have at with the direct death experience itself.
This has been a discourse by Yogeshwar Muni entitled Discourse Number 1, The Dying Process, from the Dying, Death, and After-Death Experience Seminar.